Perhaps you recognize this feeling. You open your eyes and before a single breath has fully expanded your chest, there is already a list forming somewhere behind your thoughts. There are already faces you need to respond to, problems you need to solve, versions of yourself you need to perform. The morning has not yet touched you and yet you are already behind, already insufficient, already bracing for impact against a day that has not even begun. This is not a personal failure. This is not a sign that something is broken inside you. This is what happens when a human being has learned slowly, imperceptibly, across years of repetition, that the first act of each day must be preparation for survival. The body tightens, the jaw sets itself quietly. The shoulders rise a fraction of an inch without your permission. And somewhere in the chest there is a subtle contraction, a kind of preemptive grief for the peace you sense you are already about to lose. Many people live this way for decades, not in dramatic suffering, not in crisis, but in this low and constant hum of alertness that never fully dissolves. The coffee is drunk while scrolling, the morning is consumed before it is inhabited, and the strange exhaustion that accumulates is not the exhaustion of effort, it is the exhaustion of never having arrived, of spending each day slightly ahead of yourself, slightly outside the moment, waiting for a calm that keeps receding just beyond reach. What if the calm was never ahead of you? What if it was always here? In the first moments of waking, in the space before the world makes its demands, waiting not to be found, but simply to be allowed. If something in these words feels familiar, if something in your chest quietly recognizes this wait, then stay here a little longer. There is something gentle waiting for you on the other side of this recognition. And if reflections like this one bring you even a small measure of steadiness, consider subscribing, because this kind of conversation is one worth returning to, morning after morning. Buddhist wisdom has always understood something that modern life works very hard to make us forget. The mind upon waking is not yet hardened into the shape of the day. It is soft, it is open. It is, for a few precious minutes, genuinely impressionable. Like still water before the wind arrives, like soil before seeds are chosen. What is placed into that softness leaves an imprint that deepens throughout every hour that follows. This is not metaphor. This is the quiet architecture of how human awareness actually works. The first emotional tone of the morning becomes the frequency through which everything else is filtered. Begin in urgency, and urgency becomes the lens. Begin in stillness, and stillness becomes the ground. This is why the question of how you spend your first waking moments is not a small question. It is in many ways the question beneath all other questions about how to live well. Not the dramatic gestures, not the grand resolutions, the nearly invisible patterns, repeated morning after morning, season after season, that slowly, silently become the structure of a life. The transformation that actually lasts is never loud. It arrives in the accumulation of small and quiet choices made before the world has had a chance to tell you who you need to be today. There is something worth sitting with before we go further. The culture you were raised inside, the one that celebrates relentless output, that measures worth in productivity, that treats rest as something to be earned rather than something inherently human. That culture begins its work on you the moment your alarm sounds, sometimes even before. And resisting it does not require rebellion. It does not require withdrawal from your responsibilities or your ambitions. It requires something far simpler and far more radical. The decision to begin each day with a moment that belongs only to you, before you belong to anyone or anything else. The first of these morning practices is perhaps the most quietly powerful and the most consistently underestimated. When you wake, do not reach for your phone. This sounds simple. It is not, because the pull toward that small screen is not laziness or weakness. It is the deeply conditioned response of a nervous system that has been trained to associate the first moments of awareness with the consumption of other people's urgency. Notifications are at their core a series of small demands. Each one says, "This matters more than your presence." Each one pulls your attention out of your body and into a stream of information that was not designed for your peace. It was designed for engagement. And engagement in the language of technology means activation, stimulation, the quiet opposite of stillness. When you choose, for even 10 minutes after waking, not to reach for that device, something begins to shift in the nervous system. The body receives a message it rarely receives in modern life. There is no emergency. You're allowed to arrive slowly. The breath, which had already begun to shallow in anticipation of the scroll, deepens on its own. The shoulders release. The jaw softens, and in that small act of not reaching, something opens, a space between you and your automatic reactions that is wider than it sounds. That space is where choice lives. That space is where, over time, a different kind of morning becomes possible. Alongside this, the breath itself becomes an anchor. Not in the dramatic way of formal meditation practice, but in the most ordinary and available way imaginable. The breath is always here. It does not live in yesterday's regret or tomorrow's uncertainty. It exists only now, only in this body, only in this moment. And so when you bring your attention to it, not controlling it, not deepening it artificially, just noticing the cool air arriving and the warm air leaving, you are without effort returning to the present. Buddhist practice has centered on this for centuries, not because it is exotic, but because it is true. The breath is the most reliable doorway back to what is actually happening, as opposed to what the mind insists is happening. Try this tomorrow morning. Before you stand, before you plan, before you perform, take 5 slow and natural breaths with your eyes still closed, one hand resting lightly on your chest. Feel the gentle rise and fall. Notice where the body is holding tension, perhaps the stomach, perhaps behind the eyes, perhaps in the muscles of the neck that have already begun to prepare for a day of effort. You do not need to release that tension, you only need to see it, because what you can see, you are no longer entirely inside. And what you're no longer entirely inside, you can begin to relate to with a little more kindness. From that small moment of awareness, something else becomes possible. Something that changes the entire emotional architecture of the day ahead. Instead of beginning the morning with a list of what must be accomplished, you choose a single intention. Not a goal, not a target. An intention is different in a way that matters deeply. A goal depends on circumstances cooperating, on outcomes aligning, on the world behaving according to your plans. An intention depends only on you. It is the quality of heart you decide to carry regardless of what the day brings. You might choose patience, you might choose presence, you might choose kindness toward others, or perhaps more importantly, toward yourself. And then you hold that word lightly, the way you hold a small stone in an open palm. Not gripping it, just carrying it. This matters because the American morning is, culturally, a negotiation with pressure. There is a deep and largely unexamined belief that the person who begins the day most prepared, most optimized, most ahead of schedule is the person who is doing life correctly. This belief creates mornings that feel like sprints before a race you did not choose to enter. And the exhaustion that follows is real, not because the work is too hard, but because you were never given permission to arrive at the starting line at a human pace. The intention practice is, in its quiet way, an act of reclamation. It says, before the day defines me, I will define how I want to move through it. That is not a small freedom. In a culture that rarely offers it, it is a profound one. There's another practice that works gently against the current of American morning culture, and it is the practice of noticing what is already enough, not what is perfect, not what impresses, not what compares favorably to someone else's life glimpsed on a screen. Simply, what is here? What is supporting you? What has not fallen apart? The mind by its nature and by cultural training scans for deficiency. It asks, before you have fully awakened, what is missing? What is unfinished? What am I behind on? This scanning feels like vigilance, it feels like responsibility, but it is in practice a form of suffering, a gentle and constant diminishment of the present in favor of an imagined future where everything will finally be enough. Buddhist wisdom calls the alternative to this not optimism and not denial, but clear seeing. Contentment is not pretending your life is without difficulty. It is the honest recognition that, alongside the difficulty, something is still here. The light coming through the window this morning was real. The breath in your lungs is real. The fact that your heart has been working through the night without asking anything of you is real and remarkable. These are not consolations, they are the actual texture of a life that is happening right now, in this body, in this moment, and training the mind to notice them, even briefly, even imperfectly, changes the emotional baseline from which everything else is experienced. Before you get out of bed tomorrow, name 3 things that are still here. Not achievements, not blessings that require effort to locate. Small and ordinary truths. A place to rest, a body that carried you through yesterday, someone somewhere who holds you in their thoughts. Let those 3 things be felt, not just listed. Let the mind stay with each one for 2 full breaths before moving to the next. This is not a performance of gratitude. It is an act of perception, the slow training of attention toward what is present rather than what is absent. And what the attention moves toward consistently, over time, becomes the ground of the life. The body in all of this is not incidental. It is not the vehicle you drive while your mind does the real work. Buddhist teaching has always understood what Western culture is only recently rediscovering. The mind and body are not 2 separate systems operating in parallel. They are one continuous experience, and what happens in the body shapes what happens in awareness just as surely as the reverse. When you spend the first hours of your day almost entirely in your head, planning, scrolling, worrying, you are creating a disconnection from the physical experience of being alive. And that disconnection is a subtle but real form of suffering, because joy is not a concept, it is a sensation. Warmth in the chest, lightness in the limbs. The ease of breath when nothing is being resisted. If you are not in your body, you cannot fully feel these things, even when they are present. This is why gentle morning movement in Otarkan Nogwen, not exercise as performance, not the pursuit of a better body, but simple mindful movement as a way of returning home, changes something essential about the day. 10 or 15 minutes of slow stretching, of rolling the shoulders, of walking outside with no destination and no audio in your ears. These are not inefficiencies in a productive morning routine. They are the means by which you remember that you are not a mind managing a schedule. You are a living being inhabiting a body that has carried you faithfully through every moment of your life so far. When you move with awareness and care, the nervous system registers safety. Stress hormones lower, the thoughts that had sharp edges soften, and you begin to feel, not think, but feel, that the day is not something to be endured. It is something you are already inside, already participating in, already alive within. Alongside the body, there is the question of what you allow into your awareness in those first vulnerable hours. The Buddhist tradition speaks of protecting the mind the way a gardener protects young seedlings, not from all weather, but from the weather that arrives before the roots are established. In the morning, your roots are not yet established, you are impressionable. The news, with its architecture of crisis and urgency, reaches you before you have had a chance to become yourself for the day. Social media, with its curated performances of other people's highlight reels, reaches you before your own sense of sufficiency has had time to take hold. This is not an argument for ignorance or withdrawal from the world, it is an argument for sequencing, for allowing yourself to arrive in your own morning before the world's morning arrives in you. Protect the first hour. First, treat it as something rare, because in the life most Americans are actually living, it is. The voice that speaks to you throughout this process, the internal narrator that comments on everything you do and do not do, deserves particular attention. For many people, that voice is not kind. It has absorbed, without their full awareness, the cultural message that rest must be justified and imperfection must be corrected immediately. It says, before the coffee is finished, you should be further along. It says, when something goes wrong before 9 in the morning, this is what always happens. It speaks in absolutes and in accusations that would be unrecognizable as cruelty only because they are so familiar, so constant, so woven into the background of ordinary experience that they no longer register as the violence they actually are. And if reflections on the inner voice, on the quiet revolution of learning to speak to yourself differently, feel like something worth returning to, then let this be an open door. There is more waiting here for you, and it would be a genuine honor to walk through it together. The practice of compassionate self-talk is not about replacing honest self-assessment with empty affirmation. It is about applying the same standard of basic human decency to yourself that you would apply without question to anyone you love. When a friend makes a mistake, you do not say, "You always do this. You never get it right. What is wrong with you?" You say, "This is hard. You are learning. You are doing your best with what you have. You are allowed to begin again." There is no version of that friend who deserves that kindness and no version of you who does not. The gap between how you speak to others in difficulty and how you speak to yourself in difficulty is often the exact measurement of how far from peace you are living. Closing that gap, slowly, imperfectly, one morning at a time, is one of the most fundamentally transformative things a human being can do. And finally, at the center of all of this, there is the recognition that Buddhist wisdom places above all others when it comes to the morning. This day will not return. Not this light, not this particular configuration of your life, your relationships, your awareness, your body. Impermanence is not a philosophy to be debated. It is the actual nature of time experienced in the body every morning when you wake to find that yesterday is completely, irrevocably gone, and today has never existed before. For the mind conditioned to seek control, this is terrifying. But for the mind that has learned to let go a little, that has practiced arriving in the morning without immediately trying to manage the morning, impermanence becomes something else entirely. It becomes the reason that small things matter. It becomes the reason that the cup of coffee, the quality of light through the window, the sound of the neighborhood waking up, these are not ordinary, they are unrepeatable. And what is unrepeatable, when truly seen, is sacred. The small frustrations of the day, the delayed email, the difficult conversation, the plan that did not hold, become easier to release when you understand that they too are impermanent. They will pass. Everything passes. The suffering is not in the passing. The suffering is in the grip, in the insistence that this moment be different from what it is. When you begin your morning with practices that loosen the grip, that train you gently and repeatedly toward presence rather than performance, toward sufficiency rather than deficiency, toward kindness rather than pressure, you're not building a morning routine. You're building a different relationship with being alive. These are not rules. They are not obligations to add to the already considerable weight of what you are carrying. They are invitations, quiet, patient, non-urgent, to begin meeting your mornings differently. To resist the phone for 10 minutes, to breathe before you plan, to choose one word to carry, to name what is still here, to move your body with care, to protect the early hours from noise that can wait, to speak to yourself as you would speak to someone you love, to hold the impermanence of the day not as a threat but as a reminder that this is worth showing up for. You do not need to practice all of these tomorrow. You do not need to get it right. You only need to begin somewhere. One breath, one morning, one small act of arriving in your own life before the world takes you somewhere else. And if you find yourself returning to these words, returning to this kind of conversation as a steady companion through the seasons of your life, then know this. That door is always open. May your mornings grow quieter. May your days feel less like races you didn't choose to enter. May you find in the first soft moments before the world begins that you are already completely enough. And if this reflection offered you even a small measure of peace, if it reminded you of something you already knew but had forgotten in the rush, then let this be a place you return to. Subscribe and let this kind of gentle wisdom meet you at the start of each new day.